warfare is a part of human nature. Not like I'm encouraging anyone to go to war at all.
Yeah.
But sometimes it is inevitable.
I think World War III, in terms of physical destruction, is still further in the future, except we truly have a psychopath.
So people will say like Kim Jong-un is a massive threat in the sense that he has a huge nuclear
You
arsenal.
cannot leave North Korea.
If there is a world war today, you will see whatever weapon you think everybody makes noise about,
Yeah.
maybe hypersonic missile or
Yeah.
ICBMs that people talk. You will see something new.
If they were successful at getting the nuclear bomb faster than the United States,
Wow,
obviously, they would have used
All of
it.
us will be saying, hey,
But
look
they
at-
used all the available options to them.
Do you think humanity would survive a World War III?
I don't know what World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Agora. Yeah, I'm sure you missed us, but we are here again. So today we have a very interesting topic, and I'm sure it's one that has probably come across your mind, but you've never really been able to like articulate it, right? It's tagged, is war necessary for peace, right? Is war necessary for peace? I mean, this is so important, especially in this day and age. This is currently like this is September 2024, right? We have so many wars going on across the world. There's a war in Ukraine against Russia. There's a war going on between Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, and there's also the war going on, in several other parts of the world, like in Sudan, in Syria, in Yemen. Like it just feels like this cycle of warfare has pretty much become synonymous with human civilization. Almost for the first, records of history, we start seeing that there have been cases of warfare either between countries internally or even country versus country, brother versus brother, family versus family. Is like, when can we end this cycle of warfare, right? So it's a very interesting topic we are going to be discussing today, and I have with me two of the best people that you can discuss the kind of topic with, because it's a very difficult one to approach. But yeah, I have with me Ifeanyi.
Hi, guys.
Yeah, so Ifeanyi is quite vast in geopolitics and philosophical issues of this nature. And then we also have Semeton as well. Semeton is a co-host in the Perspective podcast, also a very interesting podcast that's been going on for like 3 years now, thereabout, if I'm correct, right? Yeah. So you can always check them out via the link in the description, right? Yeah. Very interesting topic today. Is war necessary for peace, right? This is a topic that so many peace experts or Nobel Peace Prize winners, right, have tried to approach, and many of them, they've done quite some extensive work in it, right? But we're only going to try to take it like a step further in this discussion, right? Building on what the template they've already laid upon, right? And I think it's so important considering the fact that we now have things like massive amounts of nuclear weapons that are being housed in several countries of the world, in Russia, in US, in China, so many countries of the world currently, right? And these nuclear weapons, some of them are like almost 5 or 10 times, even like 1,000 times stronger than the nuclear weapon that was used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II, right? So we have weapons that are capable of pretty much annihilating human civilization currently, right? And that definitely is a cause for concern. So I think there's no better time to talk about this topic. Like, is war necessary for peace, or is there a way that we can avert this current and recurrent cycle of warfare? So I'd like to get like your perspective, right? So when you think about the topic, is war necessary for peace? Like, what is the first approach that you think about? Like, how exactly can we approach this topic?
Yeah, first of all, you have to approach the topic from the motive. Why does a country or a community or a state or a civilization generally, why do they go to war? Are you fighting an oppressor? Are you trying to exert your dominance? Are you trying to fight for your own territory or for another person's territory? So there are different reasons and motives why a country goes to war. So sometimes some wars do bring peace, especially when the other side is has totally surrendered for the most
Yeah.
part. But then what kind of peace? Is it peace that everybody negotiates and you don't get everything you want, but you are a bit comfortable with the outcome, or the kind of graveyard peace where your the dominant power just
Has
defeated you
subdued.
and you are just subdued, and you probably can't talk because you don't have the numbers or the
Yeah.
weapons to fight them, which in any case, that kind of peace can only last as long
For
as it
sure.
lasts, and in the future, something else is going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think very interesting point. Some people say things like it's impossible to have peace without justice, right? So I think it's a common phrase that is kind of gaining traction now, like there is no peace without justice, blah blah blah, and all of that, right? So, but I also wanted to ask a particular question, right? In the sense that even though there's some camp that goes around it, there's a particular camp that says like there's no peace without justice. There are also like some people on, you could say maybe they are on the fringe end, right? They say things like they are like no war absolutists basically, right? Meaning that they believe that there's no justification whatsoever for going to war. So meaning even if they invade your land, they steal your produce, your resources, probably inflict damage on your women and children and all of that, they still feel like there is no justification whatsoever for warfare. So do you lean towards that camp, or do you lean towards the camp whereby people believe that warfare is a part of human nature and it just has to happen?
Well, I go with the part where warfare is a part of human nature. Not like I'm encouraging anyone to go to war at all,
Yeah.
but sometimes it is inevitable. Maybe it might not have been necessary at that point, but down the line, it's probably going to be inevitable because some people don't think like you. Some people
Interesting.
are inclined to be bullies. Some people are
Yeah.
inclined to want something from you. Some people are just inclined to exert dominance, in different ways. They could want to piss you off some way, somehow. So it now depends, do you fight back, or do you tamely sit? So
Surrender.
sometimes you might be open to negotiation, and even if you are open to negotiation, at what point in the negotiations do you say enough is enough?
No.
So there are many facets to this, and people that are, will I say, peace absolutists, a lot of them it might happen from the comfort of their homes.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
they say that, again, not advocating for any form of warfare.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is probably the most peaceful time in human history, as crazy as it sounds, with
It's
all
very
the
true.
weapons and with all the armory that everybody has. This is probably the most peaceful time.
Yeah.
So peace is necessary, but at the same time, there are wars in our history that if they weren't fought, we probably wouldn't have this kind of peace. We might have had peace, but it's a peace of a dictatorship or
Yeah.
peace of imperialism.
Yeah.
So there are different wars that were fought either for liberation, independence, chasing a tyrant out of power. So sometimes violence is necessary.
Yeah. I think.
Nobody has to be bullied.
Yeah. 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 I resonate with that a lot in the sense that this is like a post World War II era, right? And most of the peace that we're enjoying now are because of like people saw the reality of warfare, the damage that was caused. That's why you had things like the UN Geneva Convention and all these, other peace treaties that were signed to try to maintain this status quo of peace. So I think, yeah, to an extent, right, this those sort of things basically tend to project peace in some form of way, right? So, but I want to come to like Semeton, right? So, Semeton, when you think about that question, like, is war necessary for peace? Like, what exactly is the first approach that comes to your mind? How exactly do you approach it?
Yeah, so I like to approach it by looking at the two subject matter, which is war and which is space. And sometimes they come and they intertwine, other times they can stand alone. So, what is exactly peace, for instance? Is it just quiet? Is it just abundance? Is it just there is no dictator, there's nobody punishing me of some sort? So, peace can mean different things, different circumstances as well. And why do people go to war is a different reason as well. Am I going to war because I feel like, oh, this is on an inhabited land, and like I kind of like it. Let me take this to myself. Since I have the resource to capture it, I can do that, which we've seen
Yeah.
happen a lot of time. And in that case, we can then start to look at the different reasons why people go to war. All right. So, and the classic example that I've been trying to give, which is, do I go to a place and invade them, is I'm waging a war against someone. So the question now becomes, what would those people feel about that? Are they going to feel like they are peace and they are okay, okay, well, we like this person invading us, just keep it going? Or they feel like, oh, this person's kind of disrupting our way of life and what we've
Yeah.
been doing. And the question then becomes, what do they do at that point in time to kind of restore the order to what it used to be and what they've always known? And so when you look at the subject of is what necessary for peace, what you've seen that the debate has always been is that sometimes it's just inevitable. All right. And sometimes negotiations can work, to be very honest. Other times, it start with negotiations and then end in warfare. And then it just shows you how complex the entire thing is. All right. But over and over again, the greatest peace that we've experienced in the planet, in this world that we live in, have always been after great wars. All right. And it's usually after the enemy or the person that is causing the havoc has been thoroughly dealt with or eliminated, or after people have seen the catastrophe, the scale of the catastrophe, and they're like, guys, we can't afford this
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And so usually that kind of thing sort of bring inevitable peace,
Yeah.
and sometimes the peace that you want.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we're still going to probably look at examples, but that just shows you that you can't just, like the other follow-up question that he threw to him, like, okay, do we live in a world in which we should not go to war? The question, it just depends, really, because if you have an oppressor, what do you do? Do you stay and like, what, I don't want to fight, and this person, I can tolerate this person for as long as possible? No, you cannot. At some point, it's going to be like a thorn in your flesh. What do you do at that point in time? Do you fight back? And so other times, when you look at war as well, sometimes peace can just be as a result of suppression. Maybe you've just suppressed something and then
Yeah.
the thing
Not.
can't react,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. But that may end too, because it's just going to be, for how long are you going to be able to suppress that? And we've always seen that power has shifted from a different history of our civilization. All right. So the word power currently was not the word power, say, 300 years ago, for instance.
Yeah.
It means that at some point, that dominance is going to end. And so what happens then? So do we say the peace also ended or something like that? So I
Yeah.
feel it's a very complex topic. Sometimes you have to fight, other times you can negotiate. And so that's my position on it.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I think you mentioned in your in the last stages of of the discussion, you talked about the factors, right, that could lead to warfare.
Yeah.
Right. And one of them, like when you look at history, for the most part, or maybe not the most part, but for a significant part of history, the reason why people went to warfare was because of resource limitation.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe there was a particular land that was arable, maybe a very fertile land, and they wanted to have that land for themselves to farm, to produce for their families and all of that.
Yeah.
Or maybe there were some mineral resources, right? Like we have, as Africans, right, we can relate to that in the sense that we were colonized,
Yeah.
right? So the reason why they colonized us was not because that they wanted to pretty much force their ideology. It was just they wanted the resources.
Yeah.
The ideological stuff came
Secondary.
as like probably even secondary, but it was more like like a Bible, but it was even more like a decoy, right? Saying we want to civilize these guys, but the major reason was even more about like
It
getting
was
the
like a
resource.
selling point.
Yeah, selling for let's preach Christianity, let's civilize them, right? But the major reason why they came was because of resources, right? So I think when we look at it, the resource plays a major role in causing warfare, resource limitations. Then there's also the second hand of like ideological differences, right? Ideological differences also. That's saw that in like the Cold War, where we had like Russia, or let's say the Soviet Union, and
Basically, democracy, communism.
yeah, allies forces. They were competing regarding what ideology should reign over the larger part of the world,
Yeah.
right? So I want to take it one by one, in the sense that okay, this resource limitation, is there the way that the world can approach it in the sense that you can minimize the effect of people, or the propensity rather of people to go to war because of their clashing over land, clashing over resources, clashing over these things? Like how exactly is there a better way to approach it rather than just letting this continuous cycle of warfare to keep on going?
Um, no. If your answer is a like strict yes or no answer, the answer
Yeah.
is no. But another thing, one of the reasons why we are probably in the most peaceful time in human history is also because we are in the most prosperous time in human history.
Yeah.
Most countries are productive. most people, for the most part, about say 70% of the world now lives on more than $1 a day.
Yeah.
Throughout human history, what we've known is poverty for the
Mm.
most part. It's
Uh,
only now where people are having abundance.
yeah.
In parts of the Western world, there's nothing like food shortages again. That
Yeah.
didn't
It
used to
wasn't
be
common.
the norm. Before it was okay, our resources are depleted, we might need resources. Who are the people we can get them from? And then you go head on. And then there might also be ideological differences too, as you said, though maybe we might get to that later, but you know, now
Okay.
okay, now that probably there might be a superpower that leads who the ideology or what the ideology is. Though people might not always like it, but when more and more people think
Different.
with a certain ideology, there is less tendency for them to clash than when everybody
Yeah.
has different ideology towards things,
Views.
and then obviously it might lead to
Yeah, so I would like to touch more on that ideological point, but maybe not now, right? In the sense that I think the Western Hemisphere basically has tried to like put up this identity of democracy as like the go-to standard, right, for countries all over the world. So even if a country is not fully democratic, you see them always trying to act democratic, like you see in Russia, for example. Like you see in Russia, in China,
yeah,
TV. I
even
think
in Africa here,
yeah, even in
a
Africa, we
lot of
have demo
elections
elections.
right
I think
now.
the last discussion we talked about the TV elections going on
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Communist Party,
fake
right?
freedom of the press
Where
and all of that.
yeah,
We have to put up the
yeah,
fight
yeah,
so
yeah.
that
So I think the ideological differences are in a way being resolved, although still there's still so much work to be done. But we talked about the resource constraints, right? I think even in Nigeria, right, we are seeing that kind of situation play out in the sense that, like Ifeanyi was pointing out correctly, he said that before, right, it was very rare that you have long stretches of time where there's no famine, where people are having access to food constantly, as we have currently in most parts of the world right now, right? But then there's this thing called climate change, right, that is starting to happen. Some people argue whether or not climate change is true or not, but one thing you can't deny is that for many parts of the world, right, even in Nigeria, northern Nigeria, for example, we are seeing severe cases of drought starting to happen, right? So there are places like farmlands that were previously farmlands where they usually rear their cattle and all of that. They don't really have access to, arable land there anymore. So you are seeing the herders starting to move down south, and they are starting to clash with like the farmers, this farmer herders class crisis that we are seeing, right? Which is also causing another form of warfare again, right? It's almost like we're talking about what we're saying. So yeah, but what I'm saying is basically that it's looking like climate change is starting to slowly, but almost assuredly bring us to that point where people are now starting to have this clash again for resources, right? So how exactly can we like mitigate, or is there a way that we can share these resources? Maybe someone wants to speak on that. Like, is there a way, do you feel like there's a possibility for humanity to like address this resource limitation in the sense of maybe the UN creates a model for sharing of mineral resources or land resources and all of that? Do you think that that's feasible?
The UN has been trying to do that for decades now. So I think we can ask them what success. I think they've been successful to a great extent. I mean, let's give it to them because it's true. We have a lot of opportunities presenting now to people than ever before. Like we've already mentioned, I mean, it's very easy for you to stand from the corner of your village and then become something like just
Yeah,
because of that. It's
yeah,
much more difficult before. But the question that I would like to put forward is the people, like who is going to where are we going to get this resource from? Probably going to get it from the countries that have abundance in quote. So what would be the caveat for it? Because eventually that's where it goes to. So look at the US for instance. They try to go to a place and help them, yeah. But you know that they are surely going to get something back, and that's true for any country, whether it's China. I mean the superpowers now.
yeah,
But they're coming to help you. You are going to give them something, and that's something you're giving them back. It always cause conflict. Always. See that there's a section of the population that doesn't like, don't
doesn't
want
agree with
conflict. I
it.
mean, we've had something similar. I think there was there was a bill that was passed recently on LGBT, and people are kind of like
Yeah,
campaigning for it just because you want to get some deal from. Of course, those things will happen. So those are also like precursors to conflict in the future, because by the time a bigger country is helping you, then kind of you just become like an extension of that country, and they want to have a say in your policies, because then it has to favor them, obviously. And so that is already building towards something again in the future. So we can have a conversation around that. And I know it's kind of different. So the idea of sharing resource, I feel, is also a very delicate matter. I think the UN is already trying to do that by saying, okay, if you have more, I mean, we also have a lot of foundations all over the world. Say the Bill Gates Foundation now. I mean, take the Bill Gates Foundation away from, say, West Africa, for instance, and then see what malaria is going to do to that particular region, right? And so I think that is happening, but I'm not exactly confident if we're going to get to a place in human history that there's going to be equitable access to resource. I don't think that will ever happen. I think the imbalance is probably what is even driving the world forward. I mean, if the world is balanced and it's truly balanced, I don't think we're ever going to get to that personally. I think we're always going to have superpowers and lesser powers. We're going to have people in between.
yeah,
We're going to have countries that are just there and they're just okay, but they're always going to be those ones up and this one down. And that will always happen, to be very honest. That's my
that's right.
position on it.
Yeah.
Whether that will lead to war or not is a different conversation.
Yeah, I was actually going to like double down on that in the sense that, so if you know that we will constantly always be in the situation where there's resource limitation, right? Like for Nigeria, like the headers farmer clash right now. So that means like inevitably we are resigning to the fact that conflict will always arise, right? And warfare as a result may come out.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
They're not necessary. Again, some things might help if there is more adaptation, because sometimes these things to hinge on leadership.
Yeah.
If there is more adaptation and people are able to make those arable lands, because those lands, the north for example in Nigeria, is very big, is very vast. There is more than enough food from that region to feed probably the whole of West Africa if it's properly cultivated.
Yeah.
But when there is a lack of leadership, a lack of direction, those are when those kind of things occur. Also, countries can basically go to war for anything sometimes. So again, as we're coming back on the topic, going back on topic, depends on the motive. In the Arab world, a lot of the land they fight for basically is deserts, but they still go to war. So it might not always mean because of resources.
Yep.
Sometimes some countries might come in because of the oil and all of that, but for the most part, even in the internal conflicts in the
Yes.
Arab world, it's a lot of desert, but they still go to war. So countries go to war for different reasons. So we can't just pin it on, okay, because you want
Resources, right?
some resources.
Yeah.
And I would like to add to that, because I feel in this age and time, resource is not the primary reason why countries go
Countries
to
go
war.
to war, yes.
I feel
Yeah.
it's all about, maybe they want to extend their ideology in terms
Yeah.
of economic ideology, like capitalism and communism, for instance. That still basically exists. I mean, that's the present one US is fighting with China, basically. All right. There's also like religious ideologies that also kind of seep in sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes all these economic ideologies stem out from those religious beliefs too, sometimes. And so I mean, these days and time, people are not really bothered. At least when I say people, I mean the leadership, because those are the people going to war, really.
Yeah.
They're not really bothered about the resource, because more often than not, they have those resources. It's more like, okay, these people should think the way I'm thinking,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
they should not interfere in what I'm doing, something like
Yeah.
that. And so the war we have these days, we can give all mostly the wars that are happening now.
Yeah.
There may be a lot of, okay, maybe land, and they happen, but I feel it's a subset of the larger thing of, it's more of like an identity thing, an ideology
Yeah.
thing,
Power
a
tussle.
power tussle kind of a
Yes.
thing, which will have more.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. I think so. Yeah, that brings me to like the second topic. Like, I think that's a good interlude for the second reason I was trying to raise. So, if you remember, I said that on the right hand we have like resource limitation, on the left hand we have like ideological conflicts, right? So, I think you're very correct in the sense that most of the warfare happening currently, most of it fundamentally more of like an ideological conflict, right? In the sense that people perceive that maybe there's something wrong with the point of view, basically, of the other side, right? Like, if, for example, in Russia, the Russia-Ukraine war, I don't really think the Russians are like fighting for the Donbass or Luhansk region because they want to farm
It's
there.
secondary.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's secondary. It's not like they don't want that resource, but it is secondary.
exactly.
It's more of a way of,
Ideology, like,
I
yeah,
yes, not wanting the Western influence over
influence over those
Ukraine.
places,
Yes,
especially those
because
regions actually like
yes,
Russian
very close to
speaking
their
and
border.
traditionally
Yes, so
similar. Yeah. So yeah, so when it comes to this issue of like ideological conflict, right? Is there a way that we can approach it such that obviously we may never have a situation where the entire world are like kumbaya, singing kumbaya and like believing the same thing and all of that. But is there a way we can at least build a structure for tolerance? Right. So I mean like a structure for tolerance, because I know that there's a lot of people that come and say things like let us just be tolerant and all of that. You cannot just keep on saying let's just be tolerant. There are people who don't give a damn about your tolerance and all of that. So is there a way that maybe the United Nations can create a structure for tolerance of ideological differences? Right? Do you think that's a possibility, or will you just like go into the other camp, right? Basically, of like ideological differences will always exist, so let people fight it out. Whichever ideology conquers which one, then let them win.
yeah, I mean, the United Nations is made up of nations, so
Mm,
they basically will, at the end of the day, have different ideologies,
yeah,
want different resources, want different territories. Some nations will want to expand, some will want to, let's say, move away from the influence of another
another,
nation,
yeah,
and the major decision makers in the UN will at some point have ideological differences
yeah.
between each other. So sometimes because they can't go directly in a confrontation, they
And I use
might form
proxies.
proxies or whatever. So it's never really going to stop for the most part when you talk about that. Though there might be reduced warfare, the more and more access to information that people have. But what
Yeah,
then do you do with the information, and how do you process the information? So those are the things that might now determine the reaction of your citizenry or your communities on the UN.
regarding
So
it.
those are some of the
Yeah.
things.
So then you want to add to?
Yeah, so first of all, you can't kill ideologies. And often than not, the reason for that is because ideologies can be tied, like can be closely tied to identity as
Yeah.
well. And you should also know that there's a lot of paranoia, and that is why these things would not disappear. The paranoia, like, if we truly allow these people in, and I'm going to use the classic case of Russia and US, if we are truly allies, what is going to happen down the line? So that's what people are always trying to project, that maybe in the future Russia then take over. So what
Yeah.
happens if this leader become crazy? I mean, you don't even know if it will, but what happens if they now have access to our weaponry? Won't they bite back at us?
Very
So I
true.
think that paranoia exists, and so everyone is trying to like close their borders. And you know what? We still need to preserve this form of identity, no matter what. You understand that sort of a thing. And so, in terms of are we going to now get to a point in which everybody are going to be truly tolerant? Again, I'm very skeptical of that. Look at the UN, for instance. We have countries that have veto powers. And what that means is that they can basically get away with what they want. You understand? And it has happened consistently. That was why there is no resolution even with the Ukraine Russia war, because Russia will always veto the votes. No matter what you guys, they veto it, and that is the end of it. And if it's for the US too, they are going to veto it too. If it's for the China too, they're going to do like something similar as well. And so everybody will always fight for their own interest, And I'm going to use the US classic sake. There might be internal disagreement. Some people might call themselves liberal, some people might call themselves Republican. It doesn't matter. Just the president, whether it's liberal or Republican, is still always going to fight those proxy wars, no matter what, just because of that identity that they have. So you just know that it's an ideological thing that is like closely tied to the identity. But will there be truly a solution? Again, I feel this is like the most peaceful time we've ever had. At least when you read about it, might be an inside bias, but when you look at it, it seems this is like the most peaceful time we have, and the time that there is a lot of information. People kind of say, you know what, maybe these people are not bad after all. So will it ever get better? I am not sure. And maybe we can hope that would be the case, but I'm actually not sure about that because those ideologies sometimes are fundamentally different, and not just different. Sometimes they are opposite. And so, how do you reconcile things that are like opposite? For instance, like, unless you eliminate one, so are they? Is the other part willing to give up their own ideology for yours? And I think that is the
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
So yeah, I think you mentioned something very key when you talked about the sense of paranoia,
Yeah.
right? I think that's fundamentally what drives hate, right? And hate is what eventually leads to war, in the sense that there's this sense of threat that a particular country or a group of people may feel regarding another set of people. Like for example, in the Israel Hamas war,
Yeah.
right? The reason why Israelis, if you ask Israelis, why are you, occupying, at least based on international definition, why are you occupying these people? They'll say that if they don't control those borders, right, or if they don't have their military presence there, there's a high likelihood that those guys are going to bring in weapons and try to annihilate Israel,
Yeah.
right? And if you ask the Hamas, okay, why are you not attacking Israel? They tell you that because they are occupying us and we want to be free. So it's like at the end of the day, both sides have a good point of view, but that sense of threat is what is now fueling this hatred, like this cycle of hatred. So I think maybe I'll try to get. I'd like to get your perspectives as well. But how exactly can we address this sense of threat? Because it's a sense of threat. There's a sense of mistrust as well, and there's also a sense of like fear about the other side, right? Israel, for example, they feel like if Palestine becomes like they have full statehood and military, there's a possibility that 10 years down the line they can decide that, you know what, now that we have these weapons, let's do it this time. You get, so that sense of fear is always there, right? So is there a way, like as humans, or maybe like the United Nations, because we are not necessarily in the place of power now to implement it. Maybe hopefully one day. I'm just joking, but like is there a way we can tackle that sense of fear in human society?
No, fear is a human emotion. It's always going to be there at some point. Sometimes a country they might be meek and humble because they are not, prosperous and powerful yet. And then the more a country begins to get powerful, the more they want to exert themselves in the grand scheme of things. And some countries just believe that it's part of their, will I say, identity, or what they kept on being
Yeah,
told, that we are destined for greatness. We are destined to be the ultimate superpower. So you can't tell an American that uh, 5 years down the line, I want to challenge you and I'm going to be the new superpower.
yeah,
They are not going to let
yeah,
it go.
Yeah.
Just like the Soviets also believe they have a stake. The Chinese from 5,000 years ago believe that they are a special people
yeah,
whose mantle in the world. In
yeah,
fact, they see it currently as this is the millennium of humiliation for them. And deep down, there is just this fervent belief that at some point they are going to gain ground.
yeah.
While there are some countries that feel like, okay, this period, um, especially maybe the Islamic countries in the Arab world, they feel like this century Islam has been really humiliated and all of that, and at some point they'll be the ones to take
Take
charge.
over.
Yeah, and then even if you come to Africa, some countries might believe that they want to be the ones that will dictate things here.
Nigeria, the giant of Africa.
Yes, it's never really going to, that kind of situation is never really going to end.
So it's more like there's this element of like human ego
Yes,
and
human ego, nationalism, pride, bitterness, fear, those things will come
so,
into
but
play.
okay, yeah. So maybe in a generic, okay, but Samuel, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. So when you look at let's look at the aftermath of World War II, for instance, and there was this arms race in building nuclear weapon. But then it got to a point that after the Cold War, you know what? Let's drown all this nuclear weapon. How many people actually did that? Because this is the question. If we're going to start, say we have 10 each, all right? Somebody is going to have to destroy theirs first before the other. You don't do it simultaneously. Even when you say let's do it simultaneously, what is the guarantee that this other person is going to delete theirs? And so it's just best for me to keep mine and keep theirs, right? That is the paranoia playing a huge role there, and that will always exist. So if the Israelis do not occupy those places, what will the Hamas do? From the Israelis' point of view, the Hamas are bad people, not the Palestinians. The Palestinians are wonderful people. It doesn't matter whether they are casualties and what is going on. Oh, they are always good people. But these Hamas, they are bad people. We have to deal with them. So it doesn't matter what Hamas says. Even if Hamas says, you know what, okay, we are conceding with you guys, and Hamas don't actually go and concede to them, it's like, no, you're not. You're plotting something, even if they don't have good reasons to think that. And so I think those paranoia will always be there, and you can't just help it. And I think that's where deterrence come to play, to just play a way of trust. Okay, if you have yours and I have mine, and then let's see.
The threat of mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but is there a way we can have like a, maybe it may not be a generic answer, but a case specific answer, in the sense that let's look at Germany,
Yeah.
Nazi Germany, and imperialistic Japan as examples. These guys were as imperialist as they come. You understand? Like
have it.
Japan wanted to control, be dominant in Asia, basically. And you look at the Japan of that 1940 period. You look at the Japan of 2024, like parallel opposites, right? It's like, how exactly did that? It's just like a miracle, like someone waved the magic wand or something. Yeah,
It's
so
a miracle, actually.
it's actually a miracle. I agree with you.
Magic ones, really.
Yeah, I agree with you. But what I'm saying is like, so it looks like there was something that the Allied forces, particularly the US, did in Japan that was able to, number one, neutralize that sense of threat,
Yeah.
both from the American perspective, right? That if Japan come back, are they going to attack us? And then also from the Japanese perspective, in the sense that they could now trust the US basically because they were starting to fund them educationally and they removed the emperor and all those other things. So is it like, do you believe that maybe there could be some case specific actions that could be taken to mitigate this sense of mistrust and all of that? Maybe we've not just decided to exploit those options.
I mean, what option was really utilized in the case of Japan, for instance? That was a very devastating one. And now, of course, there seems to be, or let's say there is actually peace and a form of trust. Are we really sure of that? Because after the nuclear weapon were deployed to Japan, there was really nothing they could do. You
It's true,
mentioned the
sure.
time, the
Yeah.
time was neutralized. So I don't think it's now appropriate to put up the question of do they now trust now? What could you have done?
And Germany to the Dresden bombing, kind of
Exactly.
like,
So like a sense of trust will come in the place of I can do something, but just because of some other reasons, I decided not to do that. Then I trust you fully. That is trust, really. But if it's a thing of I've conquered you, and then you don't have any
I
other
agree, I agree. I
option.
think that's a very good point.
So
Yeah, yeah.
then and I mean, look at the ones that are fighting now. It's because that kind of thing did not happen to them. Supposing that sort of thing happened to them, to be a separate word altogether.
Yeah, I
And so, I
understand.
mean, if it was the Nazi Germany that was able to deploy or detonate the nuclear bombs, of course there may be some form of peace, but and some trust, but
They are
then
just
or
subdued.
you're
Yeah,
subdued, so there's nothing you
yeah.
can do.
So, but I would like us to stay within that theme of like
Yeah.
Nazi Germany, right? Let's move on to like an example of a case where some people argue that this war could have been averted, while some say that nah, this was inevitable, it had to happen, right? And that's like World War One, right? Because even before World War Two happened, most of the factors that led to World War Two were because of like unsettled disputes, right?
Differences, yeah.
Yeah, differences that happened in World War One. So let's just let's examine World War One. Like for example, right? I think Ifeanyi also, yeah, I know he has done quite a lot of studies in the World War One,
And
right?
I was quite a lot. So
Yeah.
I checked on something. No, basically, let me just
So, but let me just set the premise, right? Um, when it comes to the issue of World War One, do you think like the war was could be averted, or do you think that it was inevitable? Like in this case, was the war necessary for peace?
obviously the peace didn't come because there was World War Two.
Interesting, yeah, yeah. Very true.
Even World War One, if you look at the way Europe was building at that time, it was inevitable. It might not have happened in 1914, but maybe it would have happened in 1918 or 1925. It was always going to happen because what was happening then was some empires were on the decline, while some were on the up and coming.
Yeah.
Like Germany began to get stronger, the Russian Empire was disorganized. The UK as at then were very strong colonialists. They had a lot of colonies all over Africa
Yeah.
and Asia. Same with the US and then France also. So a lot of these major world powers, they knew that at some point the civilizations were going to clash. So even what started the war again was inevitable, but at the same time, negotiations could have pacified some countries. Though the war was always going to come if you look at how the countries were. So what happened was, as at that time, there were a lot of alliances. You know, Germany was allied with Austro-Hungary and Italy, while the UK was allied with France and Russia. So then there was this clamor for Serbian nationalism,
Yeah.
which Russia was backing the Serbs.
Yeah.
So some Serbian nationalists were really anti-German and anti-Austrian. So Austro-Hungary, which had the backing of Germany, didn't really like the Serbs. They didn't really want a strong Serbian state per se. So the successor to the throne, then Archduke Franz Ferdinand, because you have to remember, as at that time, Europe was imperial, unlike World War II, where the prime ministers were really the ones making decisions, or the secretary generals, depending on whatever country, or the president. Europe was made up of kings then.
Yeah.
So the successor, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife were shot by a Serbian nationalist known as Gabriel Principe in I think June 1914. So Austro-Hungary wanted Europe to condemn the killings a bit more strongly, but a lot of the European powers, they were like, sorry, it happened. That was their attitude. And then a lot of people in the Serbian newspaper dailies and media didn't really try to, be apologetic about it. Even the investigations and whatever they did into the murder were concluded very, very early. So Austria came together, met, and were like, no, I think we're going to deal with these guys. Imperial Austria at that time. So, but they knew they were going to risk the wrath of Russia. So, and then this person's allies are going to attack you, that kind of cycle. But Austria needed the backing of Germany. So things like that. And Germany was an up and coming superpower who were itching for the
Glory. Yeah.
glory or situation, I would say, to exert their dominance at some point. So what was coming, maybe with Germany or with a superpower at some point, because they wanted to be a superpower and they were itching for that moment. So when Austria declared war on Serbia, the Russians were going to back them, and Germany, who wanted the war all along, declared war on Russia, who were friends with the UK and France. So basically, everybody in Europe starts fighting and going up against each other. And then the guys in America later joined them, majorly actually due to, as we said, the causes of war, ideological differences. They didn't want Germany to be in charge of Europe. And another thing too was US at that time began to be the growing superpower. They were coming. So, and another thing that was there was they were loaning a lot of money then to the UK and France. So they knew if Germany had conquered those countries, those loans weren't going to be paid. So their money was at stake. Yeah, and a lot of people too were making money from those war and
I mean,
arming
those guys.
the countries and all of that. So a lot of things came in. They didn't go into the war that early because Woodrow Wilson, who was the president then, he had an election coming.
Yeah.
So he had an election, I think, in 1916, So they now joined the war in 1970 when he was sure of his That's basically what happened in World War.
So when you look at it like retrospectively,
Yeah.
were there some things that maybe the Serbians or the Germans or the Austro-Hungarians could have done, could have
Yes, maybe if the
averted this?
Serbians were a bit more apologetic towards Austria-Hungary. But then again, those guys had been itching to get one at the Serbians because they just wanted to curb them at all means. So eventually something else was going to trigger. Even I think before the war eventually commenced, Austria-Hungary sent I think an ultimatum to Serbia to be replied within 48 hours, and about 10 or 14 of what they sent, a few of the requests were very, very humiliating, and they sent it for the purpose of those things to be humiliating so that the Serbians would not agree and eventually they would go to war. So those
So they were
so
itching for
they
war.
were itching for war basically because they wanted to, but at the same time, they also hoped the war will be quick. They will conquer a lot of territory with
First.
Serbia and, with the backing of Germany. And Germany also wanted to, have some influence in Eastern Europe, take it away from Russia because Russia looked very weak at that time.
Yeah.
So they wanted the war to be very quick and decisive. So they have basically resources, control, and more dominance in Europe. So when you have countries that want those kind of things, it was almost inevitable that the war it could have been delayed, but inevitable, no.
It was bound to
Yeah, it
happen.
was bound to happen.
Interesting.
Yeah. That's interesting.
That's a very good summary of history.
Yeah. So, and then my position to it is that it's very difficult to look at it in hindsight because we're not there in moment in time. Something about power and resources, especially when you're up and coming, is that it makes you feel like you can do and undo, which is what I sense from what happened there. It was almost as if these guys wanted to go for it eventually. It just needed a trigger, like a catalyst to like, and that assassination was just like, okay, I think we now have a catalyst. Let's go for it and let's go for a show of power, really. And of course, Germany was really itching at that domination at that point in time, and so they kind of go for it. And whether it was necessary or not, it's not like was almost certainly going to happen just because of that. Okay, let's see. It seems we have weaponry now, we have resource now, we should be able to subdue these people. And that has always been the case throughout history. Like when people try to invade new person, I mean, look at all these emperors that we've always had. Was it necessary? Most often than not, no. But they go anyways just because of that ego
Yeah.
and that eagerness to go and
They
like
can.
exercise
They
what
can.
and they can actually, stuff like that. And was there peace? Of course not, because soon after, soon after there was what's it called? There was a secondary to it, or like the part two, and funny how he involved the same person too, and of course maybe we talk about that later. Maybe what could have happened there was if they were thoroughly dealt with, maybe they wouldn't have fallen
Yeah,
back.
yeah,
You
very
know,
interesting. Yeah, I think that's also something that I would like to transition into like World War II as well. So usually when there's like a major war that happens,
yeah,
one thing that like you've said even in this discussion is that when there is massive warfare, after people have fought for a long period of time, they now get tired and they're like, okay, let's calm down. Right? But then in World War One, there was a pretty weird situation in the sense that even after the massive warfare and the Germans were defeated and Austro-Hungary and all of that, it didn't really lead to that long period of peace that you would generally expect after massive period of warfare. What it did lead to instead was, the German sentiment starting to become more and more and more nationalistic,
yeah,
become more and more even imperialistic as well. You also had situation where I think this Great Depression
Yeah.
also triggered was
Economy.
part of what triggered some of those effects, right? So it kind of like distorts the notion that at least if people had dealt with thoroughly, they would have stopped fighting. But basically, I'll just summarize it as this: like um, in World War One, do you feel like maybe the reason why World War Two ended up happening was because maybe there was not a final, annihilation basically of the willingness to fight through like concrete defeat, or was it also a case that the ideological differences basically were not tackled in that World War One, and eventually they still ended up leading to World War Two.
Right. The question would now be like, I know we're going to talk about it in detail, but even in World War II, was the ideological differences really tackled? Of course not. They were just beaten to submission.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
it's
and so I
crucial.
think that's what really, of course, like there are a lot of integrity in World War One. Like let's be very like when you look at it, there was so many integracy. Like there were there were so many stakes. You know,
Yeah,
people had like different stakes. Like it was not exactly central, I would say.
yeah,
All right. So, and one thing about war is that there's always match and rematch, except you are able to hold on to it for a long time. And I think that's what really didn't happen. You understand, like, thing? Because, of course, you mentioned ideology. In World War II, it was more central. Like, there's only different ideology here now. In World War One, now, maybe there was no really one thing that
yeah,
the fight was against. There were multiple things that the fight was
yeah.
against. And
Multiple
a
stakes.
part, like a section, lost that. But those things were still kind of lingering around and we're just waiting for let's gather together to be able, and since their resource and everything they have was not thoroughly dealt with, those things were kind of building up together. And you
Yeah,
just need one more person. Because again, let's remember that all this kind of global war, you need a few persons. It's not like the entire population that necessarily want to go to war. You just need one or two people that is able to now, guys, let's go. Now we are ready. And then it's able to mobilize people and go for it. And I think that's what really happened. It's not a thing of maybe they were not, maybe ideologies were not properly dealt with. It was just like there were so many things actually. Yeah, it was so complex. There's so many things that were still lingering around. And they were just waiting for the water to be able to spring up together. And that's what happened.
yeah,
That led to the Second World War eventually.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think also when you study like part of the things that led to the Second World War, it's also this sort of like the huge burden that France and Britain placed on Germany,
Oh yeah.
in the sense that they had to start paying a huge amounts of like reimbursements or stuff like that. So do you feel like that the usually after a war, right, there's supposed to be a form of amendment that should happen, right, to tap out some of the egos that have been bruised, because war will always bruise your ego,
Yeah.
right? So do you feel like maybe it was lacking in World War One, and that's part of why the Nazi Germany ended up rising again to go to World War Two?
Um, as going back to the beginning of the topic in the discussion, they said, why do countries go to war? I think in World War II, it was the culmination of everything from fear of
Yeah,
Nazis,
fear,
the
mistrust,
Nazi
threats.
ideology driving them, the fact that they felt they were humiliated, wanting to conquer Europe again. So everything came together, and then alliances too. Why should I back this guy? Why should I back this guy? What do I tend to gain? So everything came together, and then countries also going to war together or being allies always doesn't necessarily mean they are friends or they have the same ideology. They probably just have a common purpose, or they have a purpose for the moment. Because even then, some countries might want the outcome of a war to be different from their own allies'
Yeah,
proposition.
yeah,
So everything came together basically in World War Two. So in World War Two, one thing that happened is by the end of World War One, it brought an end to Imperial Europe. So you now had politics or politicians now controlling instead of kings. So
yeah,
it became a lot of ideological clashes and things happening. And then the Germans felt humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles that they
yeah,
signed
yeah,
in 1919 because they ceded a lot of land, a lot of resources, a lot of power. Austria-Hungary was decapitated basically. It was cut down to size. So they felt like we've been robbed here. That was their own feeling. And even when they were signing that treaty, I think there was someone, I don't remember now, but he said this treaty is only going to last 20 years. And it lasted 20 years. Like 1919 and 1939, the war started. So basically, again, um Germany, they tried to pacify them. They kept ceding one land after another from Austria, Czechoslovakia,
Yeah.
they kept saying, okay, we'll sign this negotiation, and after this, no more, no more. But when they invaded Poland, obviously, like the world powers then had to say no.
Yeah.
And then there were alliances, as I said. Russia initially stood on the sideline because they wanted to see what Germany would do, and while they are fighting for Western Europe, then they will be the guys more in charge of Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
But because of resources, Hitler then invaded Russia because at that time he thought the element of surprise and quickness would overwhelm them, and unfortunately it didn't happen that way. And then Japan, who um were allies of Germany, wanted to exert their own dominance on the Pacific, basically. So they immediately attacked China. It was brutal. They decimated the city of Nanking, and basically were in control for most of the Chinese territory. So, but the US, who were their trade partners at that time, placed a ban on exporting, I think, steel to them.
For their
And
navy.
Japanese needed steel for the war, so they bombed Pearl Harbor, and
Caused
they
the
awoke
response.
the American empire. That's how everything just happened at the end of the day. And one of the things that I would say helped to avoid will I say World War Three much faster than World War One to World War Two was two things, basically. The unconditional surrender, when the Allies knew they were going to win the war. They were going to win the war, so they demanded unconditional surrender of Japan and Germany, basically, of the Axis. Another thing too was that um at the end of the war, they saw the devastation that human beings were basically capable of. So it was a huge deterrence at that point. Like, we can't do this again. We might not survive a third world war. So basically, that was how.
So I like us to approach that, that dreading basically of the possibility of a third world war. It's something that people have already been saying that, hey, this guy is dragging us into World War One, World War Three. You see it in Trump when he was in power. Now with Biden, everybody's always trying to say, hey guys, please no World War Three and all of that. So I like to talk on that. But before we get on that, even in this World War Two context, right, we are starting to see like a uprising, sort of like a revisionist of World War One and World War Two, primarily World War Two. So, for example, Tucker Carlson, he hosted this historian, Gary Cooper, and part of what the guy said was that he said Churchill was like the chief villain of World War II. Like Winston Churchill was the chief villain of World War II, and then he also went on to say things like implying basically that the Holocaust was more like an accident, in the sense that he was pretty much saying like the Germans wanted a form of ceasefire, but then they had too many prisoners of war. Right? And so they had to decide either they let them starve to death, or they will try to fast track their death process to make it merciful. So that was part of what was implied, right? That was part of what was implied.
I'm American. I'm not English, so I don't have any weird motive in asking this, but how would you assess Winston Churchill?
I got in trouble with my podcast partner, Jocko Willink, one time because he's a New England Dutchman whose his family, it's near and dear to they're Dutch, but very near and dear to their heart that Winston Churchill is a hero, right?
Well, everyone
thinks that. He really thinks that. And I told him that I think, and maybe I'm being a little hyperbolic, maybe, but I told him, maybe trying to provoke him a little bit, that I thought Churchill was the chief villain of the Second World War. Now, he didn't kill the most people. He didn't commit the most atrocities, but I believe, and I think when you really get into it and tell the story right and don't leave anything out, you see that he was primarily responsible for that war becoming what it did, becoming something other than an invasion of Poland. Or just, at every step of the way, like people are very often, I find, surprised to learn. There's a two-step process.
Well,
right?
why don't you just make the case for that? Okay, so you've made your statement. A lot of people are thinking, well, wait a second. You just said Churchill my childhood hero, the guy with the cigar.
Yeah. Well, and the next thought that comes into their head is that, oh, you're saying Churchill was the chief villain, therefore his enemies, Adolf Hitler and so forth, were
Stalin,
the protagonists, right?
Yeah.
That they're the good guys if you think he's a villain. That's not the case. That's not what I'm saying. Germany, look, they put themselves into a position, and Adolf Hitler is chiefly responsible for this, but his whole regime is responsible for it, that when they went into the East in 1941, they launched a war where they were completely unprepared to deal with the millions and millions of prisoners of war, of local political prisoners and so forth that they were going to have to handle. They went in with no plan for that. And they just threw these people into camps, and millions of people ended up dead there. You have like letters as early as July, August 1941 from commandants of these makeshift camps that they're setting up for these millions of people who are surrendering or people they're rounding up. And so it's 2 months after, a month or two after Barbarossa was launched. And they're writing back to the high command in Berlin saying, we can't feed these people. We don't have the food to feed these people. And one of them actually says, rather than wait for them all to slowly starve this winter, wouldn't it be more humane to just finish them off quickly now?
So, but when you look at people like trying to revise this history of World War II, do you feel like the account of World War II itself is credible? Or do you feel like this revisionist, maybe there may be a bit of sense in what they are saying?
Let him go.
Okay. So, oftentimes when I say a lot of revisions to any historical thing, I like to try to get the intention of who is trying to revise it. Like, what are you trying to aim at here? Like, what is the end goal? Are you trying to just tell us, oh, this is what really happened? Or you're trying to say, what you guys have been thinking all along is all wrong. This is the right thing. So I like to look at it through that. And then I also try to look at the overwhelming consensus on it. When you look at writing history, it is difficult to write an account of any historical account like 100%. I'm going to give an example here before I even answer that question. Is look at what happened October 2020, for instance, in Nigeria at Lekki Tollgate. We lived through the event, like we all lived through the event, and it's very difficult to arrive at a consensus at what happened at it. We've had so many revisions on it. All right.
I don't think it's difficult, dude.
It's not difficult.
There are always people
But
that will
I get your point.
that
I will give
That
you
try
this
to
example.
change the
There
accounts.
was a live, there was an Instagram which I joined.
Yeah. I saw it.
joined
I saw it
Instagram,
as well.
right? And it's not the people were saying it. I joined the Instagram
What
live,
did
right?
you-
Yeah.
And you have people that will tell you to any extent how it was completely doctored. So I like to now look at account of
I've had
history,
arguments with people like that.
so when I see
crazy.
revisionists talk like that, I don't take them seriously. To be very honest, I mean, look at what you said about the genocide was seriously. I mean, look.
So let me explain. His position was that
Yeah.
Hitler wanted to make some concessions, right, and reach a ceasefire agreement, but that maybe because of the invasion of Poland, Churchill had already drawn the line that you've crossed my red line, especially with the invasion of Belgium and some of the other things that happened later on. He said, like, you've crossed my red line. So he was not willing to reach that ceasefire agreement. You understand? Like, he was like, no matter what the Germans proposed, it's like he had already made up his mind that he wants to deal with them.
And throughout that summer, Adolf Hitler is firing off radio broadcasts, giving speeches, literally sending planes over to drop leaflets over London and other British cities, trying to get the message to these people that Germany does not want to fight you. Like, we don't want to fight you. Offering peace proposals that, it said, you keep all your overseas colonies. We don't want any of that. We want Britain to be strong. The world needs Britain to be strong, especially as we face this communist threat and so forth. Like, this is what's going on. And so Churchill, I mean, you have a guy Churchill wanted a war. He wanted to fight Germany. And the reason that I don't begrudge him that, people can national leaders, you can fight whoever you want. If you feel like your the long-term interests of the British Empire are threatened by the rise of a powerful continental power like Germany, and you need to check that those are great power games, and you play them the way you feel like you need to play them. That's fine. The reason I resent Churchill so much for it is that he kept this war going when he had no way. He had no way to go back and fight this war. All he had were bombers. He was literally, by 1940, sending bomber fleets to go firebomb the Black Forest, just to burn down sections of the Black Forest. Just rank terrorism, going through and starting to, what eventually became just the carpet bombing, the saturation bombing of civilian neighborhoods, to kill, is the purpose of which was to kill as many civilians as possible. And all the men were out in the field. All the fighting age men were out in the field. And so this is old people, it's women and children, and they knew that. And they were wiping these places out. It was as gigantic scaled terrorist attacks, the greatest, scale of terrorist attacks you've ever seen in world history.
Why would he do that?
Because it was the only means that they had to continue fighting at the time. They didn't have the ability to reinvade Europe. And so he needed to keep this war going until he accomplished what he hoped to accomplish.
What was the motive?
Well, Churchill's got a long and complicated history. I mean, he's somebody who
that was the wryest smile I think I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, look, I think on one level, there was a sense that Churchill was sort of humiliated by his performance in the First World War as the head of the Admiralty, and he was out in the cold for a long time.
I mean, Gallipoli.
Yeah, and which was his operation.
Yeah,
I mean, and so he was rightly held responsible for that and seen as responsible for one of the great disasters that the British suffered during that war. And so I think part of it was probably kind of personal. He wanted redemption. He wanted to go out there and prove that he's the warlord that they can go out there and fight this big war. Probably. I think part of it, I read about Churchill and he strikes me as a psychopath.
So that's his position was, Churchill was preventing ceasefire agreements from being reached. So that's why he ended up saying that, because of that, he ended up being the
war. That's
chief.
The question they will ask.
Yeah, so I think when they invaded Poland, the British and the French.
No, I'm just trying to drive a point there. I mean, the war started.
Yeah, it didn't even start under Churchill's regime. Yeah, it didn't start under Churchill's.
So how do you now pin it on?
So yeah, but that's and Tucker Carlson called him one of the best and reliable.
Of course, Tucker Carlson will call it the most reliable. Of course, it's Tucker Carlson.
One of the trusted. Yeah, I think that was the phrase.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but that's.
So yeah, but what do you feel about revisionist of World War II?
That's a very, very wrong perspective to take. I'm sorry, because you even just have to go to the period leading up to the war and how the Jews in Germany were basically starting to be blamed for the loss in the war by the Nazis.
Yep.
So they were rounded up, their possessions taken from them, and they're taken to camps and mines. So from the start, you already projected death to these people at some point.
Yeah.
So even in Poland, places like the Warsaw Ghetto, if you look at how there's I think a documentary that I watched. If you look at how the Warsaw Ghetto was in 1939 and how it was by 1943, it is an astounding show of, I don't know the term I'll use, probably a mixture of starvation, war, hunger, and destruction can do to a people. People were literally dying on the streets. So these guys always had that in them.
Yeah.
You have to know the people that you are dealing with here.
Yeah.
The people you are dealing with were driven by an ideological mindset.
Yep.
They saw some set of people as subhuman. So there's no form of negotiation you were going to do with them at that point that was going to change it. As long as they had any form of power, they were always going to do what they were going to do. I mean, Hitler and his cohorts at some point, they met together for what they called the final solution. And then they were putting these guys in gas chambers. And they saw it as a faster way of eliminating those people.
Yeah.
Because even the men of the SS that were in charge of those camps were tired of shooting those people. They got traumatized. So it's got easier if they put them in gas chambers, turn on the machine, the gas chamber, and after 5 minutes everybody is dead. So basically you can't stop that kind of ideology.
Yeah.
Just like the fascists in Italy or Japan.
You can't reach a ceasefire
Imperial
with
Japan, where those guys were not going to surrender.
Yeah, kamikaze.
I mean, how do you even revise that? Like,
Yeah.
that's
So but it's a growing
yeah.
trend, and many people are, trying to. I think the reason why people are revising or trying to like approach that viewpoint of revisionism is that they feel that there have been so many matters that the government, particularly like the U.S. government and the world powers as a whole, have been, dishonest about.
Yeah.
Right? They feel like there's so many things that have been hidden. Maybe like with Kennedy, for example, the CIA coming out to say that it was a lone shooter and all of that. But people don't really buy that. Most people don't buy that just one random dude was able to target the president. So
Yeah.
they feel like maybe there's a conspiracy of all these
That's true.
things.
That's true. I actually know that when you see an element of distrust in something, you will tend to distrust everything that they've said.
Yeah,
But I think that's a mistake. To be very honest, I mean, when we look at World War II and the aftermath of it, and the involvement of the Jews and the kind of calamity they suffered. Come on, like it was so clear that Hitler was not going to stop, anyways, if it was not stopped,
yeah,
and if they were successful at getting the nuclear bomb faster than the United States,
wow, yeah.
obviously they would have used
All
it
of us would be saying, hey,
because they
Hitler.
used all the available options to them.
As if
Like
they
they
were
used all the
already
available.
developing like
Yeah.
the V2
Yeah.
bombs, and scientists like Albert Einstein and who was of German origin.
Yeah.
They were literally, people were looking at them in particular. Are you sure you're not working for this guy?
Yeah,
Things
Einstein-
like
Einstein
that.
went to the
Niels
US
Bohr.
government.
Yeah. So they were. It was basically an arms race of who gets the most destructive weapon
at that point.
fastest.
Yeah.
So, and for the Japanese, basically, you don't, even with the ideology they had, you just had to look at the human cost of lives at that point. The invasion of mainland Japan, what the US suffered in battles like Okinawa and
Yeah.
Iwo Jima.
They're
It
raising
was
civilians
really
as
devastating.
yeah.
So invading the country, because those were islands
Yeah.
before you get to Japan.
Yeah.
So invading mainland Japan, it was going to cost
cost
between
of,
250,000 to 1 million US troops their lives.
Yeah.
So what does that exact on your country? So I mean, it's not a good solution, but it was the only alternative
Yeah.
at that point.
At that point.
At
So
that point
yeah,
in time.
yeah. So yeah, I think let's double down on that point, right? So what the US used basically to conquer imperialist Japan was nuclear weapons,
Yeah.
right? And then the nuclear weapon they used that time, I think there were two. Is it Fat Man, Abi, and then Little Boy?
A little boy.
Yeah, Fat Man and Little Boy, right? But then, if you look at Fat Man and Little Boy, and you compare it to the nuclear weapons we have today now, this was a Big Daddy and
The star bomb is
this was a Big Daddy and
Senior
Jumbo Man. Yeah. Right. So the nuclear weapons we have today are like thousands of times much more destructive than what was used in Japan, right? And what that means for humanity as a whole is that we are pretty much 15 minutes away from annihilation, right? And I think we became very close, especially during the Cold War, where they thought that the US had fired nuclear weapons at Russia. And then the generals, they were asking them to give your consent so that we can do it. I think it was just one general, if I'm correct. Yeah, the final one that was supposed to give the pass for them to, retaliate, that decided to hold on for a little while, right? And then eventually they found out it was a false flag, right? Meaning, if not by now, we will not be here, right? We'll probably be in a bunker trying to hide from radiation, right? So humanity is at a very huge risk of annihilation from nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
But the supporters of nuclear weapons will be like, okay, they are very important in the sense that they help to deter further warfare, right? So probably the reason why a Russia will not attack a US is because they know that it's going to end up in nuclear weapon and nobody will win that kind of warfare, right? So in your own perspective, do you feel that nuclear weapons are a net positive in preventing warfare? Or do you think they're a net negative to humanity in the sense that the restraints of using nuclear weapons is growing weaker and weaker?
Yeah.
If, like in just this past month, I'm sorry the question is taking long, but like just this past month, we saw that Russia revised the standards that or the protocols they have to take to, launch a nuclear weapon at their opponents because of the US and NATO supplying long-range missiles to Ukraine, and they're now targeting mainland Russia. So they just made it easier, basically, to use nuclear weapons now. So do you feel like the presence of nuclear weapons basically is like a bigger threat, or do you think that it is a net positive in the sense that it helps to prevent warfare?
Of course, I'm not sure it's exactly net positive because we are all living under that dread, But it's obviously a very good deterrent so far. The thing about like the development of nuclear weapons we have was that it had to happen eventually. There was no way to curb it, and once they were able to develop the first one, nobody was going to stop. So it's like down the line, we are going to have a lot of arsenals eventually. So we just have to find a way to live with them. So we just live in that kind of era. However, I do not think we are going to get to a point that they are going to really deploy nuclear weapons to fight right now, except you really have a crazy man in charge. Because when you look at the cost, no one is really willing to bear the cost because no one is going to win out of it, given the amount that each country has. Both the United States and Russia and any surrounding country are going to basically be wiped out from the face. I mean, civilization is going to be dealt with thoroughly by the time they deploy all of those arsenals. What I feel can happen is that there is an increase in technical warfare, like in cyber warfare, and that's kind of the things we're kind of having now. So like having different countries trying to hack into other countries' systems and trying to take down their grid, take down their and maybe remotely control those arsenal, then kind of now we have it. There is nothing you can do. Something like that. So I feel that we are going to have more of that than a physical launching of a nuclear weapon. Like, oh, I've started. I'm waiting for you. Because you know that once you start, I mean, I was reading about what will happen if you launch a nuclear weapon to a US soil, for instance. Automatically, you're going to trigger like 50 at once to come and decimate it. So nobody's going to win out of that kind of situation. So what they're probably going to continue to do is what they are doing now: use those long-range missiles to just take down military place and maybe try to remotely control, cyber warfare, basically hack into systems and try to control them and say, oh, I'm the winner here, then you have to submit to me, something like that. So that's my position on that. I can't see whether it's a net positive. We have to live with it. We don't have any other option, really. So that's my position.
If I was your position.
Yeah, I think this is the kind of situation where fear is a valuable asset because basically everybody knows that if this guy nukes me, I'm going to
Get
I'm going
nuked.
to nuke him, and everybody gets nuked, and your continent or your country
It's
is
good.
gone. But another thing, it's sometimes just have to you just have to have a crazy person in power, as he said, and that crazy person might not have like say an irrational kind of thinking and all of that because um for example, so if Putin, who is at war with Ukraine now, at some point feels threatened because obviously he's a dictator, he's an imperialist, and these people wanting dictators have his ego. So if he feels that at some point the Russian people are going to turn against him because what are you gaining from the war? You're just sending our men to die. You're not going to conquer Ukraine. It's obvious because they have the backing of NATO and they have weapons. And our army is probably not motivated to keep going to this war. What does he do? Does he now use a nuke to, does he nuke Ukraine or nuke a part of Ukraine just to show that he can do it, or that this war has to end somewhere and I'm not going to be the one that loses out?
Yeah, so like similar to what we're saying, like in the sense that they have already lowered the threshold
Yeah.
for what it takes to launch a nuclear weapon. I think things like that is a very real possibility, right? That some kind of strong man or some kind of person who is kind of disillusioned can end up launching those um, nuclear weapons. But hopefully, we're able to like at least dissuade such a precedence.
Yeah, I don't know because he's people like that, they are just going to look at a country like Ukraine and be like, okay, if I nuke Ukraine, nobody's going to nuke me, because as much as they have interest in Ukraine and their
Yeah,
allies,
that's
they're
another
not
thing.
gaining anything.
Yeah.
Ukraine does not have the capacity to return fire. So, but at the same time, if I say I want Ukraine, do I want to burn it to the ground to own it? So those are the things going on in
So
his head
so
for him. He might
yeah,
just need that one trigger,
yeah.
and anything
So
we are saying, all the caution, you throw it away.
so like your perception of deterrence is like the deterrence is majorly for the nuclear armed countries
Yes.
rather than even smaller countries, right?
Yes, rather than small country, because for nuclear countries, that mutually assured destruction.
Yeah,
That's just what. That's why they wage proxy wars. That's
yeah,
why they fund different groups, whether terrorist groups, whether militant groups, whether governments or dictators in smaller countries to
yeah,
impose their will. So those are the things that you probably will see keep going.
yeah. I think can agree with that. So but like I'd like to just in the light of this threat of a nuclear weapon, nuclear warfare rather. So, Samantha, what do you think? Do you think that, at least based on where we stand currently as human civilization, do you think we are closer to a World War III, or do you think we are like farther away from it?
Yeah, I'm not sure we are really. I think what leaders, as much as we can have very egoistic, people that are very egoistic among them, they're very much aware of what it will cost, you know, to go to a war right now. We're just recovering from the COVID. Everybody has not recovered. There's still a lot of resource that's still going around. You still need. You might be rich, you might be powerful as an individual, but you need more than that to
So we
wage
need
a war
war.
and win a
Yeah,
war. You need people. You need the support of people. You need a lot of motivation. So I'm not sure, even if you are a dictator and all, you're still going to count your cost. Right now, there is no exact country that can do that and say they will come out at the top eventually. So I think everybody is really thinking about it. If you start a war now, you're not going to necessarily win. We can look at a lot of instances. We can look at US after 9/11, the war on terrorism, for instance. And eventually they pulled out of Afghanistan because you can't sustain that kind of war for a long period of time. You're going to lose your resource. And
yeah,
you have people at home, you want them to turn back against you. At some point, if the Russian people feel like they do not support what Putin is doing and they come out en masse against him, there's nothing he can do. He can't kill all of them. Exactly. So he has to still have them on his side for a long period of time. And even as a fact that he's a dictator, he wants to, maybe he is or not, he wants to do his will, he still needs the support of his people. If he nukes Ukraine, for instance, how would they see him, for instance, as a
Yeah.
person? He needs that rating to be up and going. So I think a lot of people are really putting that into perspective. They would rather go for proxy stuff, that they can easily justify and explain away than to go into like a full-blown war, for instance. It's just like what also happened with the ECOWAS thing, like with the coup going around, and then ECOWAS saying, let's fight against them. Okay, go ahead and do that. And let's see who wins or lose. So everybody's looking at resource, everybody's looking at what can I gain, everybody's looking at what can I lose. The world is building itself. Everyone is aware of that right now. So the cost of war, nobody can pay it right now. It's easy to destroy things, but you're going to build it back. Where are you going to see the resource? So I think those kind of things are kind of make
is
everybody reconsider. So you have very good reasons to actually go and attack someone, something that you can justify. That's why someone like Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, whatever his name is, can still come in front of you and still say something because he feels like he has justification. There are certain lines that even right now, once he crosses it, that is the end for him. Nobody's going to take him serious again. And so everybody is aware of that and just trying to push it clearly. Putin changing the protocol, personally, I feel is a bluff. Really, he's just trying to show that I can do it.
Yes.
You guys be afraid of me.
Yes.
He,
Yes.
like, what is stopping NATO from supplying Ukraine, for instance, nuclear weapon in the case that they are hit with nuclear weapon? There is nothing really stopping them because they are not still attacking Russia as it were right now. They can supply them and they can also retaliate. He's very much aware of that, and that's why we rather try to form alliances with other countries, economical war, all this kind of a thing, just to be in a stronger position, as it is. So I think World War III, in terms of physical destruction, is still further in the future. That's where I feel about it. except we truly have a psychopath. I don't think all the leaders we have right now are truly that. I'm not sure they are truly. They've got into that instrument.
Okay, so people will say like Kim Jong Un is a massive threat in the sense that he has a huge nuclear
You
arsenal.
cannot leave North Korea. The best you can do is bully people around you. Is it coming to bully US or bully Russia or China? You can't do that.
Okay. So, in your opinion, we are not close to World War Three.
Maybe in another sense, like a world war in another, maybe informational, propaganda. We are having a lot of that. We continue to have those, but in terms of physical, let's
Full-blown
go
war.
box to box.
If I what's your perspective on it? Do you think we are closer to World War Three in the light of this nuclear deterrence, or do you think we are further away from it?
Yeah, for the most part, a lot of times before I didn't think we were, but looking now, you see that for some reason a lot of these newer, not new, sorry, a lot of these world powers, they are rearming themselves. They are just preparing for a war. They don't know what exactly the context of the war is going to be fought on. Like you just see that US, their military budgets have gotten bigger and they want to expand or get more bases. China have spent a lot before they didn't spend much on military. Even Japan that basically had stayed out of that, they are now rearming again.
Yeah.
So there must be something in the back of their minds that okay, someday, somehow, somewhere, one confrontation is going to happen. In actuality, for now, I don't think there is anything really because of that fear of what if it happens. But all it takes is one crazy person to
Do
get
you,
the
do you,
button.
all right, but do you think humanity would survive a World War Three?
Let me tell you one thing that about Einstein.
Exactly.
He said, I don't know what World War Three will be fought with, but World War Four will be fought with sticks and stones.
Yeah.
So we can't survive it. You ruin the whole
So
situation.
you also agree that we will not survive a World War Three?
Surely. Like the world is so interconnected right now that all you just need is a single trigger and everything is
Yeah. I think COVID also showed that the supply chain limitations and all of that.
Yeah.
Right. So, but then, in the light of like trying to avert a World War Three as well, some people will say that what is constantly pushing us towards war is like this huge elephant in the room, right? That nobody seems to be addressing, which is like the military-industrial complex.
Oh yes.
Right? Particularly in the US, right, where you have like maybe not only with the US, even in France as well and some other European countries, you have like this Gagamont, these Gagamont military companies, right? They used to be like, I think in the US there were like 56 of them. Then they made some regulations that made them to merge into 5, right? So you have like 5 of them that are majorly supplying these weapons. So do you think like this profitalization or this profiting of war is pretty much what is responsible, number one, for keeping up with this cycle of warfare, right? Or do you think that it is basically just people trying to defend themselves? At the end of the day, they will need weapons, so we should allow this the continuation of the military industrial complex, right? And I think, especially in the US, it's like a growing concern where you have some people like Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney, right? People that they perceive them to be like, people that are profiting from war and constantly trying to push warfare and all of that. You saw it with Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, the way they were clamoring for it, like, let's get them. Yeah, Afghanistan and all the likes. Yeah. So basically the premise of the question is like, is the military industrial complex continuing this cycle of war? Are they pushing us towards the continuation of this cycle of war, or are they just a necessity for the defense of states?
They're surely not for the defense of state, but I think they are taking advantage of it. They might not be at the front of pushing it because eventually we can most times point to the cause of the conflict. Maybe they opt for it and try to take advantage of it, like we have it now. Like, okay, Russia is doing something, let's pump more weapons to Ukraine for them to defend themselves. No, no, we are not a fan of conflict. We are just supporting. They have to defend now, stuff like so. Obviously, they want to take advantage of that. So, and they may now be lobbying into like important places, like say where they make the laws, for instance, or where they sign those budget now, like, you know what, support it and that kind of thing. And yeah, those things can now put us in perpetual state of conflict, of recurring conflict, but it might not be the cause of it necessarily. It's just like, okay, now there's a cause, let's sort of lobby into it, let's sort of, we need to make profit. But of course, capitalism is like, we want to make profit of anything, just like we have in COVID too. The pharmaceutical company, they cashed out big and they would rather allow it to continue. No, it should not end. We should get our big bucks, But they were not the cause of it. They were just like, okay, now we have it. Let's take advantage.
Opportunist.
Yeah, they were just opportunists. So we do have, a lot of them. So, but do we necessarily need to have a like weaponry industry that should be? Of course not. Like, what are you hoping that there should be war?
So they will say
Hopefully,
like,
yeah.
so the argument for them would be like, if you don't have like private industries or industries that are devoted towards developing these weapons,
Yeah.
your enemies,
We don't
like in
want
the case of the US, maybe like China or Russia, they are going to go ahead anyway.
that's
So it's
general.
like everybody is like trying to push ahead to develop new weapons because they fear that if they don't develop new weapons, the other side will develop the new weapons anyway. So it's like this, like we said in the beginning, this sense of fear and threat that is constantly fueling this rage towards warfare.
I don't see the correlation between that and private enterprises making weapons, because the government can have an arm of it doing that anyways, and is doing that solely for that purpose. But if we now start having private sectors doing that, then clearly it's not necessarily in the interest. I mean,
Yeah.
during the World War, they had to start the Manhattan Project as a necessity, and that was done. So imagine if there was a company that say, what we'll be doing is like we'll be having different Manhattan projects from time to time, just because we want to protect it. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And the people are just taking opportunity of that. So that's where I say about it. Like, the privatization of it is obviously for the profit of it.
So they say like the government is not so efficient, so that's why private companies have to come in to
I mean,
do
who
what the
are in the
government is
government
doing.
really? Private individuals. I'm just saying that
That's true,
if
sure.
that was the primary motive, then it would be a government thing. It would be like a societal thing. That, okay, this I'm just like NASA, for instance, like this is the weapons program,
Yeah.
and this is what we do.
Yeah.
Because we are fighting against. So, but once we now start having private entities setting up companies, then clearly they are just doing businesses, and all they want is how to make profit out of it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If I watch like your take on it, do you think like the industrial complex, the military industrial complex is like a necessity, or do you think they're like majorly like a cause of further warfare in our world?
I think it's both. They are just necessary because they are always going to produce weapons, and every country basically has their own complex. In US, maybe it's more pronounced because of the whole capitalist nature, but everywhere around the world, every people make money from wars. And that there are people that they are arms dealers. Like in Russia, they deal with black market weapons. They are basically the number one suppliers of black market weapons. There's a guy that the US just released, I think, is it Victor Bout also, that they exchanged for a female basketball
Yeah,
player.
yeah.
Yeah, he's an arms dealer. So these people will always make money in war. Funny enough, in World War I, the US were not directly involved at the beginning, but they were funding Russia, sorry, no, yeah, Russia, UK, and France, and we're doing it through JP Morgan. JP Morgan is the big bank. So what that bank at that time, would they want the war to stop as long as their interests were not threatened? Because whatever transactions and things that are happening, they are gaining from it.
Yeah.
Some countries want war to keep going on, so everyone is distracted while they are taking
doing
the
their own
resources. Even in Nigeria, this war on terrorism is paying some people
Yeah.
now. People that make boots, people that make military wares, people that sell food to people in the army. I'm talking the basics now. I'm not talking of people now contracting the weapons like generals and all of that. They, like, at some point they pay to keep it going.
So, but do you think that that's profiting from war is now like is in a way it is being like how do I put it? There's a
Exploited.
not even like exploited, but like there's now a sort of like an artificial push towards warfare. Like normally people will have disagreements, maybe they're fighting over land, and then I say, okay, you have weapons, give us weapons. Yeah. And then there's not a difference there's a difference between that and then when you are not instigating or deliberately trying to instigate the war so that you can set off your old weapons.
I don't think it's more of a push. I think it's more of either what I'll call trigger or not wanting the situation to come to a
To
decisive
resolved.
end. You just keep
Persistent
it going.
warfare, yeah.
Keep it persistent. Just let it linger, and you keep your money
Enough
keeps
peace
coming in.
to
Just
make things
enough
calm.
peace, not the controlled chaos. That's what we call it.
Yeah. I think that's insightful. So so hopefully like there could be changes made to the military industrial complex, right? You support the like any form of like restructuring.
In the US, for example, like before Dwight Eisenhower left, he warned about the military industrial complex,
Yeah.
and it has grown and grown and grown and grown. Like, so it's going to be difficult because every country is in an arms race. So if they keep going and with that, they need more money. They are going to pump in more money, need more knowledge and all of that. So people will keep making money from these things. If you stop, your enemy might not stop. Where you think you stop, that's when another person thinks he has to continue.
Yeah.
So basically, it's going to be very difficult concepts to deal with. I just hope we have enough people with
Willpower.
requisite leadership to deal with such situations, because at some point they might even grow bigger
Than the
than the
government.
government.
Yeah, that's another thing I wanted to say. Like in the sense of there's now lobbyist groups, right? Even in the US, even in Nigeria as well, right? There's a sort of like lobbying for the continuation of arming, the military, of course, the people that are arming the military are these private companies, right? In Nigeria as well, securing defense contracts as well. A lot of people come to lobby for those contracts as well, right? So, do you sense like maybe Senator, do you think that there's a better way it can be restructured? Like even if it is a necessary evil, as Obi said, like okay, the military industrial complex will need to exist. But can it be restructured in a way that prevents this exploitation of warfare?
Yeah, I mean, this is where the government come in and leadership really plays a huge role. And like Obi said, you need people with requisite knowledge, and not just that would not put their own intention over the overall well-being of the country or society. You know. So because in cases like this, you just want to curb it, honestly. Like that is just the way around it. You want to put a limit to how well it's going to expand, how many people are going to be going into that. That's what I'm saying. Like this kind of industry shouldn't be privatized, to be very honest. Like it should be like a more public affair. Like the public actually have a say in what is happening. But right now it's being privatized, and it now becomes a thing of my personal interest and the interest of the stakeholders, for instance. And that's exactly what we've seen, let's say, with pharmaceutical, which I mean, there's also biological weapon in warfare, anyways, which have those kind of people dictate, what it is, what information is being given out. We cannot even tell whether or not they are true or false because it depends on what they say. But if they are more public oriented, at least you are required to give all information necessary based on what you are doing, why you are doing them, and to whom it's meant for. So maybe in cases like that, if you have leadership that can do that, basically, it's a public thing, let's say like NASA, for instance, and it's being directly managed by the government. Maybe that can help it. But if that's not the case, anywhere people make money from, people will always go there. You can't stop them from going there, right? And they will always hope that there's a reason why people patronize them. And if that way means that they want to lobby, you've given a very classic example, like in case of Nigeria where we have kidnappers and all. Obviously, they are being supplied by weapons, and people like that will want the issues to continue. And many of them actually have influence or probably are directly involved with governance. And you will see that, oh, this is the kind of laws you should make that would really curb this or even make some significant changes. And they would not do it or maybe make it linger
Yeah.
for many years for them to say. And you now start to see that, come on, like if you're not gaining from this, then why did that happen? That's why it shouldn't be privatized, because people will always put their interests ahead of the interests of others, so long they are not affected anyways. So it should be a thing. I think what US did by kind of consolidating it sort of makes sense, but then again, it's not exactly as efficient as the way, because these are still private entities and you can see how clearly they are lobbying to it, and they're not really listening to the people. They are doing their own, and they have this to now
Profit.
like do that with the government and also. But if it's a government thing, is a thing like, oh, this is what the people want, or this is what the people don't want, and also.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, for me, I feel, as you said, there might have to be some sort of significant government control, though there is obviously going to be some secrecy behind
Makes
it,
sense.
because you don't want your adversary to know
Yeah.
what
You're
you have,
developing.
what new
Yeah,
weapon you
yeah,
have. If there is a world war today, you will see whatever weapon you think everybody makes noise about,
Yeah.
maybe hypersonic missile or
yeah,
ICBMs that people talk. You will see something new.
yeah.
So, like, if you look at World War II, the weapons that they started with and the weapons they ended with
Yeah.
were very different.
Yeah.
It's just a space of 5 6 years. So, obviously there has to be some secrecy to it, but as we both agreed, that leadership that comes in where you draw the line between arming yourself and overtly, putting yourself in
Instigating.
situations where you want to keep the money rolling in.
Yeah. Very important. So yeah, let's just tie it up with this, like a pretty much consensus on what you think can be done to like further limit uh the occurrences of war, right? So even if it may not necessarily be at a stage in human civilization, right, where we can outrightly end wars, right? But at least there could be steps that we can take to minimize the occurrences of wars, right? So do you have like any perspective that you could say would help to at least address this sense of fear, threat, mistrust, like you said, and then also this, competition for ideological prevalences or supremacy, and then also for like the resource limitations. How can they be addressed?
Wow, that's a very big one, really, because right now there is a lot of parity, in ideologies and in what people believe, and there's a lot of reservations, for instance. And where do we even start from? I think education is going to play a lot of role
Yeah.
in this case. And when I talk about education, I mean from very, very ground roots. So let's take the Israel-Palestinian conflict, for instance. We have a new generation coming up. What they are saying and what they are hearing matters, right? Because the people that we have there today that are fighting the war were not there 50 years ago when the war kind of started to
Yeah.
spring about. They heard things, they were told things, they saw things. And those are the things that kind of build up together. And then you now start seeing groups and cliques forming together. And before you know it, you have like people that are fighting against like an opposition. So I think you have to now start to catch them young, exactly, and start to educate people about what is right. That is very difficult to again. I like to put it this way, like it's just that when people talk about AI, I'm trying to bring that in, like, will AI take out the world? How should they be trained? The question I ask is, on whose ethics do you want to train them?
Mm.
That's the very big question. So if Russia is training them now, what do you think is right or wrong? Maybe different from if Africans are training them or if the US is training them. Same thing with educating people. What if an Israeli is going to be educating like a Palestinian, my son from Gaza, for instance, almost certainly going to be different from if it's from the other side. So how we're going to now get to that consensus is like what I don't know now. But I know that if we can get to a consensus where we start training people, educating people on, on what we are, conflict will always arise, but how do we manage them for us? I think those will play a huge role. Secondly, I also feel like religious organizations will play a big role here because many of the political ideologies that come is always from a religious background.
Is it
Anywhere in
always
the
though?
most of the time.
For a lot of time.
A lot of them. Look at US. Like the idea of the democratic government has a huge base in the Judeo Christian tradition. Like it's very ingrained in it.
Okay, but like when you look at the opposite side, in terms of like the liberals,
Yeah.
most of it is like non-conformist to religious views.
Most of them are reactionary, but
Yeah.
that's like a separate conversation.
There's still that Judeo-Christian
Is there?
ethic in
Most of
the
it.
kind of structure they
Yeah.
have.
I mean,
Some
look,
people might be always tear it down, say, well, we know at the end
Yeah.
of the day, you might have to conform.
yeah. And everybody will say that they are culturally Christian. But that's like a separate thing. And if you look at from the Middle East too, most of it stem from Islam. You understand what I'm saying? So there is that too. I feel religious leaders now have a huge role to play in kind of
Minimize.
educating people to be more tolerant, for instance. Like, oh, there are people with other beliefs, they don't necessarily mean harm to you, should be accommodating.
Yeah.
So maybe if we can start from that ground up, we can have a generation of people who are much more like tolerant and are willing to give up some things that will hurt the other person, because I mean not all of them really you need to do them. I mean, you can just give it up.
Yeah.
Maybe that can help,
Very
right?
true.
And then I think policies too, like leaders can also actually make policies and concessions really more often time. Many of the wars we have today can be avoided, in terms of they can be well negotiated. And you can have negotiation and give out things. I mean, before the Russia war, there was no negotiation. They just ended in a deadlock. So most of the things either parties were kind of requesting can be tweaked, really. If you think about it, it's not maybe it's over the top. It's something that can be really, really tweaked. And then actually ask people, most of the referendum, you always see that there's always interest of the leaders directly in those referendums. It's not really from the people voting. And that's, these people have voted, so they want to be part of us. Seriously, So I think if they are really honest I mean the leaders now, about what they are doing, maybe we can have what the people really want. More often than not, the citizens, they don't want any of this because they themselves, they are tired. They just want to live their life and just have a thing to do. And so just go to that. So maybe we can have a bit of that, and many of these conflict can be minimized.
Yeah.
So that's why.
Interesting. So three things you mentioned, like education, basically. I think that's also very important because I think that's part of what the US did in Japan, in the sense that, after they removed the imperialist empire structure, they now started focusing more on like educating the newer generation. So I think it did work. Then also like the religious tolerance, right? The religious leaders have to, work together to at least try to minimize intolerant beliefs and ostracize that from society. Yeah, and then policies as well, like your diplomacy, improve on it. Right. If I do have anything you want to contribute.
Yeah, as you said, education, and also like access to quality and true information. Because that's another thing. When you give people controlled information or you tell people what you want them to hear, eventually that's what they are going to believe. So at least with the internet now, it's easier to access some of these things. That's why some of these dictatorship countries, they try to ban some
Minimize.
particular sites or things like that, so
Yeah.
that people don't get to know what the real information
Yeah.
is, so that they gear their minds towards a certain kind of purpose.
Propaganda.
So that's one of the things. And then also, as you said, just making people to know that human beings for the most part want the same things generally.
Yeah.
Generally, and that some things are unnecessary. You can live a healthy, happy human being with a family, and it's not until you conquer 10,000 acres that you now become a formidable person.
Yeah.
So those things, I feel they can help. So another thing I guess would be to, from the start, from the scratch, as you said, making people more tolerant of others. He was talking about the Japanese. The Japanese, after they lost the war, the US were there for more than 30, 35 years
Yeah.
to dramatically change their system, their altering. There's this there might be this internal conflict between, do you want to, now because you won the war, do you want to impose your kind of thinking against me? But at the same time, if you probably left them, they would have been thinking of
Radical.
revenge,
Like, yeah, I think that's something that
how they were
happened.
going to revenge. So, but because maybe as at that time the US were there, or whatever really that happened, the Japanese, they went through a time of really
Reorientation.
sober reflection and reorientation. They imagined their society like they they reimagined themselves and thought that okay, we will be people that are get towards more the ethics of hard work
Yeah.
and intelligence. That's what they now wanted to be known for, not the people that believe that the emperor is a god and they're supposed to dominate all of the
I think
world.
that's the confluence between what happened in Japan and what happened in North Korea, right? In Japan, after they conquered them, they were able to like reorientate them to shape the society and all that. But in North Korea, they were not able to, to conquer
Yeah,
them.
there was a war, so
Ye-
it splits north
Yeah,
and south,
south,
basically.
yeah. But then in the north, you now had this culture of revenge that became like the dominant view. Like we have to arm ourselves to the teeth, even to the lungs, basically, right? It's just so that they will never ever suffer that sort of
Yeah.
catastrophe as happened in
But
the world.
also a part of it too was influenced by the Cold War, the communist and
Yeah.
capitalist ideologies that split North
Yeah.
and South Korea, because each wanted to exert themselves. And
Yeah.
you can see how this person thinks and this other person thinks.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Very interesting topic. So guys, I think we've been able to like do our best to examine this very, very, very difficult topic. Is war necessary for peace? I think we came up with some resolutions that could be alternatives to war. Maybe not in the present, because right now we are a very broken species. But probably sometime in the future, someone could watch this video and get some ideas to implement. Right, education. Right, in the sense of like. Also in line with religious tolerance, basically education and religious tolerance, and not only religious tolerance but also political tolerance, I'll add as well, right? Even though your ideologies may differ, but at least you should be able to reach some common consensus as to how you want to approach those differences without necessarily resorting to war. So being tolerant on the other side is important. Then also policies as well and diplomacy. Right, ensure that whenever you're approaching diplomatic negotiations, rather, you're willing to like make necessary concessions. Right, some things are not as hard as you think they are. Right, most of it is basically just in your emotions or in your mind. Right, and then also as Ifeanyi also said as well, the ability to embrace your orientation as well. Right, so for sides that may have probably have lost the war or maybe on the losing end of things, right? Being able to like direct your energy, your focus towards things that may be more positive rather than, constantly looking back at the past and trying to like hold on to, the angers and probably the injustice of the past, right? Being able to like let go of that and venture towards what could be a bright future. So guys, we'd like to hear from you. What do you think? Is war necessary for peace? Are there some things that I disagree with what was said in this discussion? Do you have like some ideas that if you could be better alternatives, right, to this current cycle of warfare? Let's hear it in the comment section, and then hopefully we'll be able to discuss more. So thank you for listening, and do have a good time. Thank you.